Good afternoon, class. For this particular Monday pre-recorded meeting or lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about the discussion question that is going to be due later in the week. We're also going to look at how to go about quoting particular evidence or textual evidence, aka quotations from short fiction, because you're going to need to know how to do that for uh, answering those particular discussion questions that you need to answer and to be able to get really started with your short fiction essay, which is basically due in about 4 weeks from now. And as you can tell, that I moved the topic in case y'all didn't get a chance to look at it last week. It's in this week's folder. So again, that is going to be due um, about 4 weeks from now, and it needs to be about 4 to 5 pages in length. And I give you, I think 7 or 8 different topics that really discuss some of the literature that we're going to be have read by then. The thing about that is you have to kind of keep in mind that during that same week, you're also going to have a fiction exam. So the fiction exam is going to be due earlier than the actual fiction essay. And we will talk a little bit more about the structure of the fiction exam probably next week. But pretty much for that particular week, which I believe is week 5, it's just going to be exam and essay that is due. We probably won't do a lecture that week for say. Um, you will have some reading that will get you started thinking about poetry for week 6. And the poetry section basically is going to be about another 5 week, 4 or 5 week endeavor. So we talk a little bit more as that comes up. But I'm going to share the screen here and talk a little bit about the actual discussion question, what you need to do when it's due, and the difference between plot summary and analysis. So let me go ahead and share this screen here. And if you can tell, I basically have sort of a Cliff Note version of the actual discussion question. So you should be able to look in your week 2 folder, and it's probably down toward the bottom where it's going to say discussion question or topic question. And basically what you need to do is there's 2 choices, right? You have question 1 and question 2. One question deals with the Crane story, which I think I'm going to get a little bit more involved with in Wednesday's Teams lecture, and I will send that out here, if not today, definitely tomorrow. So if you're going to join our afternoon Teams lecture, that would be much appreciated because we're going to get really into the Crane piece a little bit more. If not, I will have it recorded and upload, and it will stay uploaded until probably Saturday or Sunday this week. This particular video will probably stay up until Wednesday or Thursday because I can only load up so much video content without it basically blocking some of the other stuff I have to upload. So just keep that in mind. So for your particular discussion question, you need to go ahead and read the Crane piece, right? If you decide to do the Crane question. The other question 2, I think deals mainly with the reading from last week, primarily with Chopin. So your response to one of those 2 questions, whatever you choose, needs to be about a half a page. And what I mean by about a half a page, at least 8 sentences in length, all right? No more, no less. Keep it right at 8. That will give you that 1/2 page limit that I'm looking for. Now, after you post your particular response, make sure, of course, that you proofread and edit, that you're using the proper MLA 8 format, that type stuff. You will need to come back at some point and respond to at least one of your other classmates' posts. That post needs to really have about 5 sentences in it. So we're thinking a good paragraph for both for your actual response to the initial question, and then at least a good sized paragraph for the response to one of your classmates. Now, when you respond to the classmate, you want to do it more analytically than, basically rehashing the obvious or say, yeah, I agree with you here. I like this point. You want to go a little bit more beyond that, right? Because otherwise you're not going to be able to say that in just, in 5 sentences, at least effectively. So you want to give me a little bit more. You want to think critically. You want to think analytically when you're reading these texts, because one, it's going to help you start brainstorming and getting into the draft mode when it comes to that 4 to 5 page essay 1, which deals with fiction. And it's also going to start getting you thinking critically and analytically as it relates to studying for the fiction exam here in 4 weeks as well. Both of these are due by 11:59 this Sunday, which is the 6th of September. Now, you don't have to wait until Sunday to get both of them in. The problem is usually everybody does the first part of the response, which is your response. And then we have folks that like to linger on until Friday or Saturday to try to get a response to the classmates. I wouldn't recommend anybody doing that, because you're really, one, you're screwing yourself, and you're also not helping your classmates get the grade they need. So I would definitely try to get these in a lot earlier than Sunday. Also, I can go ahead and start grading and seeing if there's any big issues that we have to focus on as it relates to your analysis and how you're using your quotes, because you want to make both of these response paragraphs, you want to provide more analysis and less plot summary. Because if you're providing more analysis and critical thinking, you're really doing what good literary analysis is meant to be. You want to provide textual evidence, which is basically quotations from your story. So if you're doing the question on the Crane piece, you want to pick out particular quotations that's going to help support your main points and claim. Now, I realize you only need 8 sentences, right? So you don't need to sit there and give me a whole buttload or boatload of quotes. You need to find 1 or 2 that's going to support your main idea. Now, as it relates to quoting when you are responding to your classmates, you don't necessarily have to use quotations there unless you want to. But initial response needs to have at least 1 to 2 quotes that support your major claims and points. You need to make sure that you're doing it in the MLA 8 format and style, and you provide your parenthetical in-text citation of your quotes properly. And I'm going to show you how to go about doing that as it relates to short fiction. You should have learned some of this back in 1101 when you had to do that research paper toward the end of that semester. If not, you should have learned a little bit about this 9th through 12th grade when you had a literature course and you had to do some sort of quoting from either poetry, verse, drama, plays, short stories, novels, that type deal. So a lot of this should just be review from pretty much K through 12th grade and whatever you should have learned from 1101 English. No matter where you took 1101 English, they should have showed you how to properly use the MLA style and how to quote parenthetically. As it relates to the works cited page, for your blogs, you don't necessarily need the works cited page, but I will tell you, every time you turn in an essay, essay 1, essay 2, the research paper, you will have a final page be your works cited page. So when I say 4 to 5 page essay for essay 1, that basically means 4 complete pages, with page 5 being your works cited page. Or if you need to go to page 5, it would be 5 complete pages, with page 6 being your works cited page. The works cited page doesn't count toward the word count, and it doesn't count toward one of your particular page numbers. Because the only thing that's listed really is that particular work that you're using. But again, remember, with the fiction essay, the one that's due in 4 weeks, I'm just looking for one particular work at the end of that works cited page. It's going to be the work that you've been talking about for those last 4 or 5 pages. Not looking for secondary material, meaning you don't have to use research from the library or research from the internet to do the paper. I'm looking for your analysis, your critical thinking, your interpretation, and then you're using the text to back up your points. So everybody's works cited page for Essay 1 should only have one work on it, and it should be the work that they choose to do that paper on. Because again, like I said, whatever we start now, you're going to just be honing these skills throughout the semester. So that's why if there's any major issues, we want to go ahead and sort of nip that in the bud before we get to Essay 2, the research paper. So you already know how to quote poetry, and you already know how to quote drama, which those are two different styles to quote. And I will show you as we get closer to the poetry and the drama section how to go about quoting those. But when you talk about literature of any kind, any genre, you need to be able to back up your points. And one way to do that is to quote from the actual text that you plan on using in your paper. So if we look at the reasons why you don't really want to use plot summary and why is it bad in 1102, it's because you don't tell me what's happened. You want to show me why it's important. Because you got to assume everybody, including me, because I teach the course, I've already read the work. I know what happens. I know the plot. I know point A to point B. You need to show me why it's important. That's where you get into your critical and analytical skills to be able to show that to me and not just tell me. Some background information is essential for context, but you want to be careful. You don't want to give me too much background information because, again, we are reading that work for that particular week or weeks. We pretty much know what a lot of the background is. So you don't need to go, 2 or 3 pages into telling me background information. I really don't care about that, right? I'm looking at your interpretation. I'm looking at your critical analysis. I could care less really about the plot because I can go to Wikipedia, I can go to Cliff Notes, I can go to Spark Notes, I can go to any of those literary sites that already have sort of the summary ready for me. I can just read that and still read your paper. So you want to avoid a lot of the plot summary because it's not needed. That's where sending me rough drafts of this first paper and to Smart Thinking will probably be beneficial because usually if I see a good chunk of, plot summary, I just put a big red X through it because I just say, hey, I already know this information. I already read this work. I know, who the characters are. I know what happens at the climax. And that's not good literary theory. That's not good literary analysis because it's just sort of rehashing the obvious that somebody probably on YouTube has already made a video about 1,000 times. So just be careful that you're not giving too much plot summary, not just in your essays, but also in these discussion questions. Because I don't want to read, a 8-sentence version of a Cliff Note version of the story. Right? I want to see what you have to say. I want to see your analytical skills at work. I want to see your critical skills at work. I want to see how you interact with other critics, AKA at this point, your classmates and myself, right? So one way that you could avoid doing a lot of plot summary is you want to introduce to your reader and readers, which, primarily me, since I have to grade the work, but when you respond and when other people in the class respond to your work, they also become readers of your work as well. So you introduce your reader to your subject matter and your approach to that topic by specifying the title work, the author, and the theme, and whatever else information that you need to provide. You don't want to just say in the short story, okay, well, we read 7 or 8 short stories this semester. So you want to be specific about the title. The author, okay, again, we read 7 or 8 different short stories, so there's different authors for each one. So you want to make sure that you pair the right title to the right author. And then you want to provide some sort of theme or content that you're going to talk about throughout that particular piece. You want to establish your personal interpretation of something in the work without stating the obvious. So again, you want to dig a little bit deeper, right? Everybody sort of knows the surface meaning or context to the particular works that we're reading if you really read the works throughout the week. We don't want the obvious that somebody's already talked about 1,000 times. right? Everybody has their own opinion on a particular work that they can analyze, that they can critique and support by providing textual evidence, right? Give me quotations, show me why this is important. Don't just tell me it's important. I need to know a little bit more. I need to see you engage with that particular author, that particular passage of the work. Descriptions of plot events should be used to support specific argumentative points. So you could talk a little bit about some of the plot events, but again, you don't want to get into the point where you're writing a book report. Literary analysis is not a book report, right? So whatever book report you wrote in middle school and high school, get that out of your head, right? There's a difference between book report and literary analysis. We're looking more for a literary analysis at this level in 1102. So just make sure that you're giving me more critical, analytical, interpretive thinking over plot summary and basically rehatching, this is what happened to John. John did this, John did that, that type of writing. And your paragraphs and your pages should be a lot better when it comes to that. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to switch off of this and look at, again, some traits of summary and some traits of analysis. Blow this up for you. Traits of summary, right, where it says identifies the main points, elements, identifies what was stated or what is included, identifies thoughts, contributions others have had, no argument or conclusion is presented, right? So when you're pretty much given a summary, you're not arguing for anything, you're not giving me any sort of solid argument, and there's really not a conclusion. It's like giving me a summary of whatever your favorite movie is and still telling me 2 hours of stuff. You're going to summarize that in probably, 5 or 10 minutes. But again, there's no argument. You're just giving me sort of the main points and you're moving on. But if you look, traits of analysis, makes an argument or reaches a conclusion, chooses specific elements or areas to study, examines, interprets each element, discuss why each element is important or significant, discuss how each element connects to other pieces, might discuss causes and effects, might discuss strengths and weaknesses or advantages and disadvantages, might discuss effectiveness over ineffectiveness. So you want more of this in your discussion questions, in your essays, and less of this, right? I can guarantee you if you're having more of this, you're going to be more successful and you're going to love your grade a lot more throughout the semester than if you have a lot of this, because this stuff with summaries is going to bring your grade down, and it's going to bring it down quickly if we don't get it under control. So again, I can't stress enough, once you start picking a topic for that essay 1, go ahead and start sending me and Smart Thinking rough drafts. The earlier the better, because if you wait till the week that this is due and you got a lot of plot summary, there's no chance, I can't guarantee that I can easily look at your paper when everybody else is probably freaking out and sending drafts from other classes as well at that point. So I would suggest maybe by the end of this week, at the beginning of next, that you go ahead and narrow down a topic that you want to write about and start writing, a page here, a page there, a page here. And before you know it, you're going to have your 4 or 5 pages, I hope, way before that 23rd or 25th of September deadline, so you can submit multiple drafts and get the highest grade possible that you want. Again, usually, like I said, those that send me multiple drafts, utilize Smart Thinking multiple times, are the ones that get the higher grade on the paper, and usually they have the better work ethic throughout the semester, and usually get one of the higher grades at the end of the semester as well, because a lot of this stuff is going to build. It's not going to go away between now and December. And if you have to take an American Lit course or another higher level Lit course at another university, this stuff is just going to continue to come up, right? It's not going to go away from here on out as it relates to literature courses. You're just going to have to be able to master it the best that you can. And 1102 is one of those courses that helps you master it. So when you do go to Georgia Southern, or you do go to Emory, or you do go to University of Florida or whatever, and you have to take another upper level English class, you won't be lost, because a lot of times when you take that next English class above this one, they're just going to assume, just like we should assume that you already know grammar and that type stuff from 1101 and how to really write a research paper. They're not going to spend too much more time on the difference between summary and analysis. They're just going to say, well, you had 1101, 1102 English, you should know how to do this. And if you still don't, then maybe you need to go see a tutor, you need to go to the writing center, or possibly you need to drop the course until you figure out how to do it and then reapply. Because this is just skills that you're going to need to know from here on out, right? They do get easier the more you do, obviously, but if you don't do a whole lot, or you don't take the time to sort of learn how to do it, then these other classes that you might have to take that deal with analysis, it's just going to be a headache for you. So take the time to learn really what you need to do, learn the difference between summary and analysis, and your life will be whole much easier moving forward. If you look, here's the difference, right? As you can tell, this is a decent sized paragraph. They say there's really no argument or conclusion presented. And again, I'm not going to read everything here verbatim. You can kind of read that for yourself. States what was included. So again, basically the stuff in yellow is just basically, a 1 to 3 sentence summary of the work, which is never good because again, it's plot summary. And then the very last sentence identifies the main points. But again, if anybody took a tour or read whatever about the Wright Brothers company museum, they would get this right away too. So there's nothing new there. They're basically just stating the obvious and moving on. There's no quotes. There's nothing that's, provocative or argumentative or nothing of that nature. So in a lot of ways, this is just, it could be a pretty good summary, but as it relates to analysis, it's really a waste of time to write and a waste of time to read because this person didn't write an analysis. So that would be a big X on your paper, right? Because you didn't do the job that you needed to do, which was provide analysis over summary. So if we look at the second one, again, I'm not going to read everything, but you notice this very first sentence, sort of the topic sentence, you could say it could be a particular thesis statement. When you're thinking of a larger paper, does make an argument and reaches to a conclusion, because as we read the other sentences, we're going to get that, especially this very last concluding sentences where it says it discuss why this is an important or significant event. We have a specific element or area is chosen to study here in the yellow, right? Worth, ethic, and character. And then we look here, this big chunk is interpretation and examination. And we have quotes throughout the piece. Now, this MLA style is a little different. I think they're using APA, so be careful of that. But the deal is, this is a nice, meaty paragraph. It's about 8 to 10 sentences in length. This is what you want to start writing when it comes to those discussion questions. These are the types of paragraphs you need to start writing when it comes to Essay 1 and Essay 2. Because really, right, 4 to 5 pages, you're going to have to write more than 5 paragraphs at this point to be able to even get the 4 pages. You may have to write 8 to 10 paragraphs. And going back to what you should have learned the last time you had an English class, which should have been 1101, your teacher or your professor at that time should have showed you or gave you examples or taught you how to go beyond that hamburger essay that you probably learned in middle and high school, right? The introduction, 3 body paragraphs, and conclusion stuff. Those work really well on standardized tests, SAT, ACT, larger groups, which most high school classes are pretty much larger than a typical college class at times. And they're just really easy to grade. They sort of hit the high points and they move on. It doesn't really grow as it relates to analytical or critical thinking. It doesn't really grow with creativity in a lot of ways. So that's why a lot of K through 12th grade teachers like them, because they're easier to grade and they can move on to the next one. Here, though, because you're going to have to write longer papers, you really need to get out of the habit of writing just 5 paragraphs, because 5 paragraphs just won't do it anymore when it relates to Essay 1, Essay 2, and especially the research paper coming up at the end of the semester. So just be wary of that. Be careful that you're not just writing a 5-paragraph essay, because you're going to have to write more. You're going to have to, utilize paragraph breaks and that type stuff. Okay, so let's take a look at MLA's short quotations and the long quotations. Generally, prose writing, and prose writing is anything short stories, novels, journals, other essays. Basically, it's sort of like everyday writing that you would see like in newspapers. So basically, when we talk about short fiction and short stories, we're basically talking about short prose writing. So when you're quoting text from your particular short story, if it's less than 4 typed lines, it's considered a short quotation. And it says here, quotations should always be incorporated into a sentence of your original prose. A quotation should never stand alone in a sentence. So you can't just throw a quotation there and then move on, right? You have to sort of blend it in with your particular sentence. It has to run, it has to make sense with your grammar and subject and nature. So the next point that you would have to know is follow each quotation with a parenthetical in-text citation containing the author's last name, unless the author is included in your sentence leading up to your quote, and the page number from which the quotation was taken. Now, I know that some of the in-text stuff, as it relates to our e-text, you can use the page numbers on our e-text. The text that I'm providing you through WebLink, just do the best you can as it relates to the page number. If it's like page 1 down here, if there's a page 1 or 2, use that page number. But it needs to have something that we can refer back to. Keep in mind, the period comes after the parenthetical citation. A question mark, exclamation point should be placed within the quotation if it's part of the quoted section, with a period following the parenthetical citation. So here is a example of a short. Right? According to John Brown, the Writing Center provides to be a calm, quiet area to learn more about writing techniques. So notice, we have a particular author, first and last name already mentioned. We move in, we have a signal phrase, right? According to. So if you need to learn some more about signal phrases, I would go to your Google search engine and type in MLA signal phrases to use. And you're going to get a whole load of signal phrases that you can choose from. Notice how the quote sort of just blends in with the rest of your sentence. That's how you want to sort of use your quotes. Now, sometimes you can have a quote at the end that is introduced with a colon, as long as what comes before the colon is not a verb. If it's a noun, you can end with a noun and then provide a colon. Sometimes you can have a verb like says or claims. There you need to have a comma after that particular verb. But you want to be careful and you want to switch that up a little bit, right? You don't want to always have the author says or the character claims. You want to do a little bit of that with a little bit of this. Notice too, I have the open quotations and I have the closed quotation marks. Notice how the period is on the outside of your actual citation of the page. Now, had it not been John Brown up here at the beginning, it would be parentheses, Brown 22, close parentheses, period. There's no comma between the last name and the page number. So keep that in mind. Some of y'all like to use that APA style where you have a comma there. You don't need it with MLA. It's last name and just page number. You don't have to spell out the word page. You don't have to abbreviate the word page. Just give me last name, if you don't mention it here, and just the actual page number. Poetry, we will talk a little bit more about that as it gets close to October. So I'm not going to tease that right now. If you want to do long quotations, and I would be wary about doing long quotations, at least with discussion questions. With a 4 to 5 page paper like you're going to have to do for Essay 1, I would probably limit the long quotations, which they also call block quotations, maybe to 1 or 2. Because again, you don't want the actual block quotation to do your work for you. Chances are it won't, because it's not analyzing itself. You have to provide the analysis interpretation to make it make sense. So if you use a quote of prose that is 4 lines or more, then you want to set off the quotation as it is here, right? You're going to have that lead into that particular block. So again, we sort of have this, John described his experience. Notice now we have, because it's a longer quote, we have that colon. Experience is a noun, right? In this case, it's not a verb, so the colon will work there. Notice too how the style is different. You want to tab each one of your lines that you're quoting from at least 2 tabs. So it'd be like 10 spaces. You have to do it for each one of your lines. So if you draw your cursor sort of around it, it looks like a square or a block, hence the name block quote. Notice there's no quotation marks at the beginning. You don't need them. There's no quotation marks at the end. Don't need them there either. You still need the in-text citation. In this case, we need the author's last name and the page number. But notice the period this time, because it is a longer quote, its block comes before the citation. All the other punctuation sort of remains the same. That would be how you would block, 4 lines or more of prose. Again, I wouldn't recommend you doing that for a short discussion question. Again, if you want to add some blocks for Essay 1, maybe 1 or 2 at the most. If you find yourself going 3 or 4, you're probably giving me too much and you need to cut a couple of those out, right? You want to use shorter quotations rather than longer quotations. It's also perfectly acceptable that if you don't feel comfortable about using block quotations, to use more short quotations. But again, if you want help with how to do this, because there are benefits of block quoting as relates to later in other college classes where you have to write longer papers, let's say a 10 to 15 page research paper or a 20 to 25 page research paper, then you would want to use some block quotes. The best thing I can suggest is to send me your drafts earlier so I can help you style it the right way so you're not losing points when I start grading those essays in 4 weeks. There is also a style or a way to do blocks when it relates to poetry or verse. And again, we'll talk a little bit more about that as it gets to the poetry section. This is just sort of a template, right? Single author. We have, if you have the author's name in the actual work, then we just need the page number. If you don't have the author's name in the actual sentence, then you need to have the author's last name and then the page number. If you have 2 authors, notice first author, second author, and page number, like we do here. If you have 3 authors, you list the 3 authors and the page number. If you have more than 3 authors, you mention the first author, then you have to use this ETAL period, because that's talking about and more. We know that there's more than 3 authors, and then you give the page number. If there's no author listed, you just give a shortened title of that work and you give the page number. Organization or corporation name, again, you can abbreviate where needed and give the page number. Scholarly journal, we'll talk a little bit more about that when it gets to the research paper. A lot of this stuff is when we get closer to November, is when we start talking more about the research paper and that type stuff. For the most part, all the stuff that we're reading right now, or at least for this first paper, is pretty much just going to be single author, right? Because you're not having to go to the library, you're not having to go to Galileo, you're not having to go to Google Scholar to find additional research for Essay 1. Okay, so I hope this is a good start, right? Again, as you start sending me drafts of your 4 to 5 page Essay 1, I can give you a little bit more pointers. I'm hoping maybe by this time next week, I will start having a couple papers in that we can actually look at as more, feedback, constructive criticism, that type deal. Because if somebody's making it early on, I can perhaps help everybody else by showing that mistake, because chances are you might be making that same mistake too and just not showing anybody yet. So again, I want you to make the best possible grade on essay 1, because the percentage of these essays go up with each new essay. So the poetry essay is going to be a little bit more higher in points. So you don't want to start off on a bad foot with this first exam and this first essay coming up in 4 weeks. If we go back to look at characterization and characters, right? This is another one of those handouts that I provide in your week 2 folder. And again, I'm briefly just going to look at some of these. This is something that you can kind of talk about when you're writing some of your discussion questions if it comes up. It's something that you can talk about in your actual essay 1 if it comes up if need be, right? We know about the main characters, supporting characters. Sometimes they're called primary and secondary characters. We have flat and round characters, static and dynamic characters, protagonist and antagonist, and anti-hero. So as you read the last 2 stories last week and you read the story this week and the stories to come, we want to think about some of these different types of characters that you come across. So as you can tell here, it says the primary character can change perception, experience, epiphanies, sometimes narrate the story, carrying the meaning of the story. Secondary characters are less developed, don't experience change, don't experience epiphany. So think about maybe the primary character and secondary characters that we read in Soldier's Home, that you read in the Chopin's piece, The Story of an Hour, and even now when you're looking at The Open Boat with Stephen Crane. We also have flat or round characters. Flat characters are stock character stereotypes. Characters stand in for ideas, don't experience emotions, don't react or take action, right? The secondary characters are often flat. A lot of times, even with TV shows, we can see a lot of these flat and round characters come and play. We also have the static, or what they call dynamic characters. The protagonist is usually the static character, or the one that will experience change and perception and change and behavior and that type of stuff. So if you look really at our last 2 stories, Miss Mallard was obviously that static character in the Chopin piece. And I guess you could say Curbs was also sort of the static character in the Hemingway piece, but does he really experience a change in perception or change in behavior? That could be debated. That could be something that you could write about with your essay 1 if you wanted. Is to argue, does Cribbs really experience a change at the very end, right? Especially when he sort of backtracks. He says he doesn't love his mother, but then he comes back and says he doesn't mean it, but does he, right? That's something that, you can debate, and that, it won't be necessarily obvious to everybody because you'd have to support your particular findings with textual analysis to back that up. Protagonist and antagonist. The protagonist is usually the main character, hero, sometimes even the anti-hero of the story. The antagonist is usually the villain or the opposite, opposing force in the story. So those are usually easy to pick out. We see those in films. We see those in episodic TV shows. There's protagonists and antagonists in cartoons, that type deal. Sometimes the protagonist is an anti-hero, a main character who is not all like the archetype protagonist. So one good example, of an anti-hero, maybe in day-to-day life would be somebody like the wrestling character Stone Cold Steve Austin. If some of y'all remember him, he presents himself as a villain, but he comes off as more as a hero because more of the blue collar crowd of the audience sort of, relate to him, right? If you ever watched any of the WWF or WWE stuff. We do have direct and indirect characterization. As you can tell here, direct characterization, the writer tells the reader about the character's personality using the narrator of the story, other characters, or the main character revealing aspects about himself or herself, right? Indirect characterization, the writer reveals to the reader what the character's personality through the thoughts, feelings, and actions of the character. So if you look here, it gives you other ways that the writer can do that. It can be through reactions from other characters. It could be from the use of dialogue. It could be the use from stream of consciousness or internal monologue, which we'll usually talk a little bit more about that in the weeks to come. It can be describing the character's actions, reactions, and behavior, or the appearance of the character. Dialogue, for the most part, you're going to have dialogue, and you especially see that a lot in the Crane piece, and you're going to see it next week with the Marvell piece as well. So dialogue keeps the story moving forward. It dramatizes the story. It develops character. We get to see personality, views, opinions, thoughts, and impressions. You want dialogue in stories just like you'd want dialogue in a 2-hour movie, because without characters speaking, it's not really going to be a pleasant 2-hour, watch if you just have music and scenery. Same thing with the reading. It's not going to be a pleasant 15 pages if you just have, somebody just writing a whole bunch of words without really any kind of interaction with the characters. Stream of consciousness is more or less a literary device to reveal memories of what the character thinks and feels. We see this a lot in James Joyce. If you read any short stories by him or novels, we see a lot of it in Virginia Woolf, another great short storyist and novelist. Probably when we get closer to Gilman's The Yellow Wallpaper, we will start to see a little bit of that in coming weeks. But at this point, you don't really need to necessarily worry about that so much for the story that we were having to read this week and for the stories that we read last. All right, so point of view. We all have different types of point of view, right? You can do any kind of definition on Wikipedia, on whatever your favorite dictionary.com site is, and it will give you one or two different definitions to your point of view. There's really 4 types of point of view: first, second, third, and of course we have 2 different. You have third limited, and then you have another third person point of view. The best thing to do is sort of remember these pronouns. I, me, and my represent first person. She, he, her, his uses third, and you and yours second. Usually stories are going to be written in first and third person. Very rarely you do see the second person in fiction writing. Sometimes you do. As it relates to you writing about fiction, you generally want to write more in third person than in first. That keeps the essays more analytical. It keeps them more academic and professional. So if you find yourself writing I, me, and my a lot, unless you're actually quoting from a particular short story, see if you can reword your sentence more in third person point of view. Because again, you want to be as objective rather than subjective in this case. And the objective point of view in academic writing is generally that third person. You never really want to use second person unless you're quoting somebody. So you don't want to use you or your in any types of writing from here on out in this particular class. So again, if you find yourself using second person, you need to get rid of that and use third. Again, practice. That usually takes a little bit of practice if you're not used to writing just in third person, but that's where the rough drafts would come in. If you submit multiple rough drafts, we can help you get to that point where you're writing in third person. Now, when it comes to narration and fiction, you're going to see the difference. You're going to see a lot in first, and you're going to see a good bit in third. So you just want to sort of keep in mind the four major ones, right, that we just looked at in that particular diagram. This is another sort of a distant in point of view, right? The second person is closer, first person's a little bit up, third person limited, third person omniscient is further away, right? So, and a lot of these stories that we read this last week and a half or so sort of dealt with more of this, the third person. So again, that's why you want to reflect your writing, your analysis, your interpretation more in the third person as well. All right, so going back and looking at overview, I had to change. One of the students on Sunday sent me an email and said that the original link that was the crane story was down or wasn't working. So I gave you a new link. It's actually a little less in pages because originally the link I gave you was 25. It's still the same story. This is just 15. I think the font and the page margins may be a little bit different. So 15 pages compared to 25. It's, again, the same story. Nothing's cut. It's just 10 pages less. So this has a little bit more of a personal feel to the local area, mainly in Jacksonville. I don't know how much of the chance that you had to look up anything about the story yet, or Crane in particular. But like I said, we will probably tackle that more because I just put it up there over the weekend. So I want to give you all at least, Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, up to Wednesday, a good 3 or 4 day period to get through a good bit of the fiction here. The other thing is, as you can tell, is the discussion board. And I give you the 2 questions there. So to go about doing the discussion, you're going to click. Obviously, you're going to have something in mind. You want to go ahead and click on the weekly writing again. And then you're going to need to create a thread. And you're going to give it a title. And then you're going to write. And then you're going to submit. And then once somebody else writes something, you want to come back and you want to comment on their particular work. So that's how you would create your initial discussion. Otherwise, if you don't create the thread, you're not going to be able to create that particular discussion, and it's just going to grade it as a 0 because nothing is there. So keep in mind, deadlines are sort of in stone at this point. You need to sort of keep up with the deadlines, because otherwise, once the folder or once the actual assignment disappears, I can't really reopen it without causing other problems throughout the course. So if you don't want to get zeros early on in the semester, you want to go ahead and, knock some of these things out sooner rather than later, so you're not having to wait in case there is a problem with your computer, or, the internet is off on a Saturday or a Friday for whatever reason, or a storm comes through. So the quicker you can sort of go through the story, annotate, take notes on the story, and then start looking at some of these questions so you can answer, the better. Because a few didn't really turn in the quiz last week, and they're already, approaching week 2 with a 0, right? So they basically got a 0 in the course moving ahead because they can't go back and redo quiz 1. For the most part, the grades with quiz 1, besides those that got a 0 because they didn't submit or turn anything in, I think the lowest grade was at a 60, and the highest grades were at 100. So I had more 100s, 90s, and 80s than I did really anything else, which is good. So it's showing me that you read the 2 stories last week and you paid attention. Again, the questions were not there to trick you up. They were really there to see how well did you read both stories. And I think some of the folks that didn't do so well, made an 80 or a 70 or 60, I think they waited until Friday or Saturday to actually start doing any of the reading, which is never fun and never good, because then you feel rushed and pressured, and that's where you make a lot of the careless mistakes. So I wouldn't rush, I wouldn't wait until you feel that rush, say Thursday or Friday, to try to read 15 or 20 pages of Crane and then try to answer those questions, or pick one question and then try to respond to, another person. I would try to go ahead and do the reading of Crane and be done with those 15 pages by this Wednesday. And then I would take Wednesday and Thursday possibly to get my response up, and then continue to sort of check back, Friday, Saturday, and Sunday to see if there's somebody there you can respond to, because that's going to be the other half of your grade. If you only respond to the question and you don't respond to anybody else, no matter how good your analysis is, you're going to get a 50 because you didn't follow instructions and complete the rest of the assignments. So really the grade goes like this. You got a 0 if you just don't turn anything in and the deadline runs out. You get a 50 if you only answer one part and not the other part, which is answering, responding to a classmate. And you get the full 100, again, if you answer one of your questions and you respond. But when I look at both, you give me the 8 and 5 paragraph sentences that I'm looking for. You're giving me the couple quotations. I'm looking at analysis and not just plot summary. So be careful. Just because you list 2 there and your grammar and your spelling is correct doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to get the 100 if your analysis isn't on point. So I hope to see everybody on Wednesday, those that can make the Teams meeting. My other class decided they wanted their meeting on Wednesday from 3 to 4. So I'm thinking about pushing ours up to about 4:30 to 5:30. And I will give you an invite for that for those that can join. Great. If not, again, I will have an upload after we finish Wednesday. If you have any other questions or any concerns or issues, or if you want to go ahead and start sending me drafts for Essay 1, please email me. If you didn't turn anything in last week or didn't log in, right now you pretty much have a 0, and we're probably going to have to list you as a no-show and drop you from the course because you just, you waited, 8-9 days to log in, and we can't really necessarily go back and make up week 1. So please don't let the assignment due dates escape you. Make sure you're checking emails and you're checking the Blackboard page on a regular basis because you don't want to get behind on anything. Otherwise, I hope you have a good Monday and Tuesday, and I will see everybody on Wednesday. Thanks.